Welcome to Grace Gardens. It was in the summer of 2016. I was sitting in my office at my desk and I saw this man rode up the driveway on a bicycle. I didn't recognize him and I thought to myself, who is this? Stephen came into my office and he shared with me his idea that he'd had for quite some time. He would ride by the church property and think, that is an excellent place for a permaculture garden. And that was the beginning of an idea that led to a meeting later that fall where 30 people gathered to talk about permaculture gardening. And from there, a more focused group began to meet to plan out what we could do with the land that the church had. I remember those early days, those early meetings. I felt it was like I was trying to herd cats toward a goal. Not in a bad way, in the sense that everyone was passionate about seeing a permaculture garden come about. And I was so thankful when a person named Bernie joined our group and he began to focus our ideas and our energies. Initially the garden we thought we'd start with 2 boxes and it quickly became 8 and then a growing field, and from there to the present we have 26 boxes and fruit trees that have been added. This all connected to something I discovered as we went along, that for 8 years people at the church have been talking about, we need to use this land. Why can't we use it for a garden? And as this conversation began to take place, this dream that had started many years earlier finally came about to fruition. We're followers of Jesus here, and part of what we want to do is contribute to the good of our community. We see ourselves as having experienced God's goodness, that we in turn share that with the people of our town. And so one of the unique things about this garden is that everything that is grown is given away free. We don't sell it to anyone. The bulk of it goes to our local food bank and also to the Family Resource Center, from time to time to Meals on Wheels, and also to those individuals who are connected with our church that would be in need. And in this way, we see ourselves helping to make a difference in our local community.
Welcome to Grace Gardens. My name is Wil VanDerPijl. I'm part of a volunteer group here that work as gardeners at Grace Gardens. I see we've got a loud truck coming by. That's just perfect. Stephen Hendrick and I are doing this video this morning to try and bring some attention to Grace Gardens and how it's working within the community to stabilize food for the local food bank. It's our 2nd year of operation. And we're going to take a few minutes and try to give you a little bit of the history and what we're doing here at Grace Gardens. So as you can see behind me, we established Grace Gardens 2 years ago, and we'll go in and let's take a look and see what we've got here. Okay. We're at this point, we're in a fall cleanup mode, so it's kind of ragtag in here. But as you can see, this is our first phase of our garden that we put in a year ago, last year. And we were able to generate approximately 1,500 pounds of fresh vegetables for the Sooke Food Bank. Initially, what we started out with was 1 piece of landscape cloth on a piece of grass. So what you see here is quite an expansion to where it started. This last year, if you'll pan over to there, Stephen, we can see that we've established our greenhouse, and we've also established perennial flower beds on our borders. And as you see out there, we have parsnips planted, and there's garlic and onion for the winter crop. So that gives you an idea of what's going on over there. The Grace Gardens was founded by interested groups in the community. Stephen himself had approached Rick Eby, who's the pastor here, about a community garden, and we actually had been at the same time as church members been asking about establishing a garden. And so we kind of came together and said, you know, this is a great idea. Let's take a look at it. I have some history with this property because 20 years ago I had crews in here and we cleared the property, and at that time we said to ourselves it would be a real shame to just clear the property, but of course the church was coming in here and it was this huge piece of property that was basically stripped of trees, and our idea was it would be really nice to bring this property back to some form of natural state. The garden itself is kind of designed after the principles of permaculture, and also a fellow that down in the States that he has a series called Back to Eden, and he uses wood chips. You'll see a lot of wood chips here. And we use wood chips to lay down on the ground, and then we allow the ground to basically reclaim the sod back to soil. And it works very well. We found it really, we don't have that many weeds, and it really works well to try and gain property back by using either live or dead chip. Now what I mean by live chip is the live chip comes off the trucks and it's got living green organic material in it. The dead chip comes from the mills and it helps us suppress weeds. So you're going to see a lot of chips in our property here, and you're going to see a lot of manure because we use a lot of both. Maybe what we can do is go down to our second phase. This was the first year's phase, and just before we go from here, you can see that we use these hoop houses, these mini hoop houses. And these houses work really well because what we do is we can do a raised bed garden and then put cover over it in our seasons. For example, we would start out by putting plastic over these hoop houses, and then as the season progresses, we'd pull the plastic off and we put netting that you would see here. So we use this netting to keep pests out. With this garden, like many, we all have our challenges, but this garden we find our major pests are quail. Quail are voracious eaters of vegetables, and they're quite persistent. We do not have problems in this garden with slugs. Again, probably because, we believe because of these chips. They are a really good thing. And the elevated boxes, we recommend anywhere between 14 and 18-inch depth boxes because we find that mass of organic material really does well. So Stephen, do you want to go down to this area now? Okay. I should say, maybe I make a note, any of the fences that you see here, our chain link fence, our wooden fences, this was provided by grants that have come from the District of Sooke. And without the participation of the District of Sooke and businesses in this area, none of this would exist. So, you know, what we found is Sooke is a very generous community, and once you make your needs known to them, we've had a tremendous response. Examples would be the Lions Club have been tremendously supportive of us and others, and that's a big part of this. The church has also made a significant donation in terms of operating costs. It costs about, currently it costs about $1,000 to run this garden just in terms of water and materials. But again, through the donations of both church members and members of the community, those costs have been covered. We have a bit of an innovative way in which we're capturing water off the roof of the church. We bring it into barrels in the back of this area here, and then we run that water all the way down to our field. So what we're trying to do is capture water and keep it on the ground wherever possible. What we also try to do is soak throughout the winter. We're trying to soak all these chips. So we have this big, large biomass of chips so that when the warmer weather comes in the spring and summer, this water reserve is not stolen from us, but is still there in the earth. We believe it's worked well. I think we can improve on that, but this whole idea of building this biomass and then soaking it with water like a sponge really works well. So you'll see it a little bit more when we go down here, what we've been doing. All right. Just a thought, you'll see these little, this is our open field. We've had some experience we're calling this bomb craters, and what we're doing is using the chips and then areas of nutrient. We'll put manure here, and we planted cucumbers in here this year, and we got several 100 pounds of cucumbers out of here, but our field experiments have not been as successful as our raised boxes. Our raised boxes are very productive, our field production not so much so. And this is a good example of somebody that might want to come on that has had some experience in terms of growing vegetables in a field. Those kind of volunteers we really want, because this is an area where somebody might be able to help us out and get our production up. So this is a good example of our field. Over here, these are our perennial, we're trying to establish a perennial bed here, and we've established several of the perennial beds. One of the things that both all of us as volunteers have said is we want Grace Gardens to be a place of real beauty going forward into the future. It's still a bit of it's rough at this point in terms of its beauty, but what we're trying to do is establish perennial gardens or perennial edge gardens like you see out here. We established this one this year, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing. So this is what we're trying to do here, is establish now another perennial bed. So, for example, if a gardener in the community says, I love to grow perennials, I love to grow bulbs, all these types of flowers, this person could come to Grace Gardens and invest in growing just these. I have several 100 dahlias now, and we also have iris that we want to grow in here. And again, this would be a wonderful opportunity for somebody to come. We've planted a few roses here and would like to continue to have several varieties of roses right throughout the whole perimeter of the garden. So that's a good example of where people say, well, what can I do, or how can I get involved? That would be a good example right there. So let's go down here and we'll just take a look and see what we've done down here. Maybe you can see these little markers here. We've dug these holes because one of the challenges we have at Grace Gardens is the wind. Now if you point over here, the Juan de Fuca Strait is there, and predominantly starting in the spring, the wind comes in at us. There's no wind today, but we get high winds that sweep across this plain, and it's really been problematic. So I think what we're going to do this year, from our experiences, we're going to put some panel fences in here, much like we have the area that we just left. We're going to put panel fences in here to see whether or not we can knock down some of that high velocity wind that sweeps over the field. So that's what this is. Again, if somebody wanted to volunteer and had carpentry experience or enjoys building fences or putting up pergolas, this is an area where they can make a huge contribution in setting the fences and staining the fences and finishing the carpentry that's involved here. So there's a project for somebody that would, if they would like to do that. Okay. These hoop houses were put in last spring. This is kind of what's called our second phase. And we kind of, oh look, there's a quail right there. Speaking of our little friends. Anyway, these hoop houses were put in this spring. And we kind of replicated what we did on the top phase. And you'll also notice that we're down in elevation. So we've kind of jumped down in elevation, and that's by design. We had a volunteer come in that was a heavy equipment operator, and he was able to cut the property down and shave it down. So we have this kind of weir effect where the water starts at the top, and then it comes down to this bench, and then it comes down to the next bench. And what we found is you can see here the incredible growth of that perennial bed. That was all just planted in seed about May, and it's just incredible, and it's because it's retaining the moisture in the ground. And all of that was just bare ground in May. This was established. This is a strawberry bed, and we went back to kind of the old way of doing things. They call them strawberries because they plant them and then place straw on them. And so this bed was planted with about 15 strawberry plants. And we got some strawberries, but next spring we are going to have a huge volume of strawberries come out of here. And it's just a simple idea of putting them on a slope, giving them lots of sun, and then bringing the straw in to keep them above the ground. And I think that's going to really do well. Again, a volunteer could come and say, I want to be the strawberry person. And they could take this on, and that's all we would ask them to do, is just say, okay, I'll be in charge of strawberries, and you come in and you take care of our strawberries. So there's a good example of how people could make a contribution. Back to these. These hoop houses were the second phase. We liked what they did up there, so we replicated them here. This design came off the internet, and as many of these great ideas do. And this one is particularly interesting because of these winds I was talking about. We put this plastic on the windward side, and it really helps keep the wind down. And this is like this stuff is had it now, but this was a wonderful broccoli crop. We got 3 broccoli crops out of this, and we're just taking the last of these little florets off now, and then this is going to be taken out. But one thing we've learned, as most gardeners do, until you experience your own garden, what you can grow and what you can't grow, it depends. It depends on the soil, it depends on a lot of things. But here, we have found we really can grow cool crops. That temperate marine climate is just ideal for things like broccoli and cabbage, cauliflower, all those things grow beautifully here. So we've kind of specialized in that this year, and we got a lot of broccoli out of here. So that's good. Let's come over here. This little strip of green that you see here is another perennial bed. We dropped down another bench. So what we wanted to do is attract, the reason the perennial beds are being put in is to attract pollinators, bees, wasps, all kind of critters to try and help us stabilize and neutralize this property back to a more natural state. So this bed was sown in May, and it has been absolutely outstanding. What we find is if give nature just a little bit of help, and she just snaps right back and heals itself so well. And this is a good example of this. So we'll be going through here. This would be another great job for a volunteer to go through and pick off some of our weeds that have established themselves in this bed and just take care of the perennial beds. We have a volunteer that just came through and harvested all the seed off these beds. So we have them in the greenhouse, and next spring, we'll be establishing new beds with these same wildflower mixes. One thought though, or one comment I'd like to make about wildflowers. All our seed comes from West Coast Seed, and they have been very gracious and very generous in their donation of seed, both vegetable and wildflower for us. So I want to kind of give a bit of a promotion to West Coast Seed. All of the seeds that we have gotten from West Coast Seed have been absolutely great. The germination rates have been wonderful, and they've been a tremendous support of the garden. So I just wanted to let you know that. This little pile of manure here that doesn't look like much is just the beginnings of our caneberry strip. What we're going to do is we're going to be putting 6x6 pillars up here, wood pillars, one there, one here. We're going to be running wire, and then we're going to be planting canes like raspberries, gooseberries, any of the berry crops. And that's what this strip is going to be. Again, if somebody has experience in growing raspberries, gooseberries, any of the caneberries, this would be a wonderful opportunity for somebody to come in here and teach us and show us how to grow these cane fruits. So that's what we basically designated this area for. Just outside this area, we've established blueberries. And again, that's something that was asked for. It's a high value crop, and people from the food bank say, boy, blueberries are a thing that really people want. So we've established approximately 15 plants here, and we're hoping that next year's crop will be quite a bit more. One of the things, the challenges we have with this, along with all berry crops, is netting and how to protect them from predation. And that's something, again, that if volunteer came on board, they may want to take on the blueberries and the caneberries as a project. And that's something that we're trying to develop. So that's to this point of the garden. Let's go over here. Walking through here is the newest part that we're trying to develop in the garden. And this is the next phase of the garden that we're trying to establish. Now, if you look out a little further there, you'll see that we've established some fruit trees. And those fruit trees were donated by members of the gardening community to Grace Gardens in the spring. And what we have done is used, again, the chips on the ground to suppress this field of grass. And we have found it to be very effective. You'll see, we lay cardboard down, and then we bury them with about a foot of this living chip. And what we find is that it breaks down very rapidly. And if you were to go, let's say, leave this for 6 months, and if you came back and lifted this up, you find that all the grass is broken down, and you have what looks like pretty good soil starting. So this is our grand experiment with chip, living chip. And we believe that it's going to transform this area into a beautiful garden. We're hoping this spring to buy engineered soil and then bring soil in and establish strips or fields in here, right on top of this living chip. So that's kind of what we're attempting to do here. What else? Did you want to look at the greenhouse? Okay, let's go down to the greenhouse and show you what we've done there. This is our greenhouse that we've established. This was a volunteer that has some engineering know-how, and he said, could I please put a greenhouse in for the garden? And he did a beautiful job. It's not finished, but he did a beautiful job of establishing this greenhouse. This greenhouse, there's a couple of features of this greenhouse that I think are really, really intelligent. For one thing, it's very low. It's buried into the ground. So that whole thermal mass, when it heats up, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful and warm in there in the spring and summer. We've established, but we haven't finished off these outside cold frames, and that's where the spring flats of seeds would come to warm up in the spring. So we're working on that now. But if you come in and look at the greenhouse, we're inside the greenhouse now. It doesn't look like much now because everything's been taken out of here, and we're just overwintering a lot of our seeds and just doing some more construction and getting it set up. This was just built midsummer this year. So a couple of things that I'd like to point out here are these totes. You can buy these totes over on the mainland for around $100. And what they're used for is food quality products, and then once they're resold to the market, and they make great containers for water storage. What we did, they're usually clear plastic, and we just painted them black to prevent any internal growth through sunlight going through them. But we gather the water off the roof of the church, and we run it all the way down from where we started. It comes down in 3/4 inch pipes, and it loads into these tanks. So we have every time it rains, these tanks fill up. Then once they're full, there's a bypass valve that runs the water out to the field. So going back to our initial theory of what we're trying to do is we're trying to build moisture into this big, heavy biomass of chips. And that's how we're doing it, through runoff through the roof into these tanks and then out to the field. When we work in the greenhouse, we now have 500 gallons of water at any time for our use. We have no plumbing to this building. It's all on passive water collection. And we're hoping to do further projects in this area. And that's, again, if somebody had a background and had an interest in water collection and water management, that's a whole area that is an exciting area for the garden to try and establish those things. Stephen and I are just talking about the philosophy of Grace Gardens and how we operate. And what I was saying is that, under normal circumstances, if you were going to try to plant a garden, you would sit down and say, okay, this is a discipline. We have to lay this out on paper. We have to plan for it. We have to not allow any deviation from the plan. And that's how normally an architectural crew or an architect or planners or people would do it. And we knew that, but we didn't do that. We thought, you know, we need to allow people the freedom to come here and kind of express what they think they would like to do. And so we allowed that, and to our surprise, we have made remarkable progress. Just we don't have anybody actually in charge. It's volunteers that come together on a Saturday morning, and we meet and we say this has to be done. And incredibly, we've produced over a ton of food out of the garden this year for the food bank, and it's just kind of been an organic thing. It's just kind of come together. So we are kind of going to stay on that track and not be so formal, and just allow people to come and say, oh, would you like to do this, or is that your interest, and allow them to just kind of do that creatively. So that's kind of our philosophy, right?
I think that's wonderful.
So it's really quite undisciplined, but it does work.
So on Thursday is the food bank. So we do our major harvesting on Wednesday afternoons and Thursday morning before the food bank comes. Last week we had 14 containers, I think over 150 pounds, that we gave to the food bank. Our goal with Grace Gardens, we give almost all of it to the food bank. And that is where the majority of it goes. And then when people present needs in the community to us, we will also help them. And at the church, there is 2 mornings a week, they have the big house breakfast. And so we also supply potatoes and onions for that, which is free to the needy in the community. So 100% of our garden is given away.